never planned to be on that road, especially not at night. But the Texas highway stretched out before me, empty and endless, disappearing into the darkness. The only company I had was the steady rumble of my old truck and the scattered starlight overhead. Everything was dry and cracked, the kind of landscape that didn't care if you came or went. There's something about Texas at night. It feels like the land has secrets. Old things buried just beneath the surface, waiting. I was headed to a town I'd never been to before, on a favor to my cousin Ben. He'd called me up last minute, said he needed help with something on his ranch. He didn't give many details, just mentioned that it was urgent. Ben and I weren't particularly close, and it wasn't like him to ask for help, so I figured it must be serious. I'd been driving for hours, and my fuel gauge was dangerously close to empty. That's when I saw it, the faint glow of a gas station sign flickering in the distance. I almost missed it, hidden behind a row of withered trees, half buried by time and neglect. The station looked ancient, worn down by years of sun and storms. The lights were dim, casting an eerie yellow glow that made the whole place feel even more surreal. I couldn't see any other cars, no signs of life, just my truck, the gas pumps, and that one lonely station in the middle of nowhere. I pulled up next to one of the pumps, cut the engine, and stepped out. The air was hot and still, pressing down on me like a weight. I scanned the area, but there wasn't a single sound. No insects buzzing, no wind rustling the trees. Just silence, thick and unnatural. As I reached for the pump, something caught my eye. A set of footprints in the dust, leading around the side of the building. They looked fresh, like someone had just been there. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows, but there was no... "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding strange in the emptiness. "Nothing." I shrugged it off and started filling the tank, keeping my eyes on the station. There was something about it that didn't sit right with me. The building looked like it had been abandoned for years, yet here I was, using a fully functional gas pump. A part of me wanted to get back in my truck and drive, but curiosity kept me rooted in place. As the tank filled, I decided to take a closer look. I stepped around to the side of the building, following the footprints. They led to a door, half open and hanging by one hinge. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the handle. I don't know why I felt the urge to go inside, but something about that door seemed wrong, like it was inviting me in, daring me to step over the threshold. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, the air instantly colder than outside. The place was dark, only a sliver of moonlight seeping through the cracks in the roof. Shelves lined the walls, covered in dust and cobwebs. The whole place smelled of mildew and something else, something metallic and sharp. I took a few steps forward, my footsteps echoing in the silence. That's when I heard it, a whisper, faint and distant, coming from somewhere deeper in the building. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like someone was murmuring, their voice low and strained. "Hello?" I called out again, my voice barely more than a whisper. The murmuring stopped, replaced by a heavy silence. I took a step back, my eyes scanning the darkness, and that's when I saw it. A figure stood at the end of the aisle, half hidden in the shadows. It was tall, its outline blurry and indistinct, like it was fading in and out of existence. I could feel its eyes on me, cold and unblinking, watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I took a step back, my foot catching on a broken bottle. The sound shattered the silence, echoing through the building like a gunshot. The figure shifted, its head tilting slightly as if it was listening. I held my breath, frozen in place. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. I stumbled back, my heart racing, and turned to leave. But as I reached for the door, it slammed shut, the sound reverberating through the building. I grabbed the handle, twisting and pulling, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. Panic set in, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of what was happening. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, and then I heard it again, that faint whisper, closer this time, like it was right behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there. Just empty aisles and shadows that seemed to shift and twist, moving in ways that didn't make sense. I backed up, pressing myself against the door, my eyes fixed on the darkness. I could feel it now, the presence in the room, cold and angry, watching me, waiting. My mind was screaming at me to get out, to run, but there was nowhere to go. The whisper grew louder, filling the air around me, a jumble of words I couldn't understand. It sounded like a warning or maybe a threat. I pressed my hands over my ears, trying to block it out, but the voice only grew louder, drowning. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, everything went silent. The air grew still, the darkness pressing in on me like a weight. I lowered my hands, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. That's when I felt it, a cold hand on my shoulder, gripping me with a strength that left me paralyzed. I wanted to scream, to fight, but I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The hand tightened, pulling me back into the darkness, and I knew, in that moment, that I was not alone. I'd been looking for a house to buy for ages, and I'd almost given up when I saw the listing. An old 2-story house with a wide porch, large windows, and several acres of land, all at a price I could actually afford. It sounded too good to be true. The description mentioned the place was located on a ranch road in the quietest part of Texas. A retreat, the ad promised, and that was exactly what I wanted. I'd been craving solitude and a fresh start, and this seemed like the perfect opportunity. The drive out to the property took me farther from the city than I'd expected. I watched the landscape change from highways and traffic lights to open, empty fields and sun-baked dirt roads. The land stretched out on either side of me, flat and desolate. Just dry grass and the occasional twisted tree silhouetted against the sky. The road that led to the property was called Desolation Ranch Road, which I thought had a sort of charm to it. It gave the house a sense of character, something unique and historic. The house itself was set back from the road, hidden behind a weathered wooden fence and a few tall oak trees. As I pulled up, I saw it had a rugged beauty to it, with a wraparound porch and an old barn off to the side. I stepped out of the car, taking in the warm air and the silence. There wasn't a single sound, just the steady, heavy quiet of the Texas countryside. The realtor, Carl, met me on the front steps with a wide grin. He was a middle-aged man with a bit of a nervous energy, which I chalked up to him being eager to make a sale. "You must be Danny," he said, extending a hand. "Welcome to Desolation Ranch." I shook his hand and looked up at the house. "It's beautiful. Honestly, I didn't think I'd find a place like this in my price range." Carl chuckled, but there was something uneasy in his eyes. "It's a great house, no doubt about it. The previous owner was, well, he had a bit of a reputation around here. He lived here for years and kept to himself. Locals say he was a little odd, but nothing dangerous." I shrugged it off, more interested in the house than local rumors. We went inside, and Carl gave me the grand tour. The house was a little dusty, but it had charm, polished wood floors, tall windows that let in the light, a big kitchen with a view of the open land outside. I felt at home almost immediately. It was exactly the quiet, peaceful retreat I'd been looking for. By the time the tour was over, I was ready to make an offer. The paperwork went through faster than I expected, and within a few weeks I was holding the keys to my new home. The first night was unsettling in ways I hadn't anticipated. I'd moved most of my things in and spent the day setting up, arranging my furniture, and unpacking boxes. By the time the sun went down, I was exhausted. I made a simple dinner, sat on the porch, and watched the stars come out one by one, filling the sky in a way they never did back in the city. It was quiet, almost too quiet. No cars, no distant hum of neighbors, just the soft rustling of the wind through the trees and the occasional creak from the old house settling. I went to bed feeling content, thinking how nice it was to finally have a place to myself. But around midnight something woke me, a noise, faint and distant, coming from downstairs. I lay there, listening, convincing myself it was just the house settling. But then I heard it again. This time, it was louder, a steady thud, like someone tapping on the floor or dragging something across it. My heart started to race, and I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was an old house, of course it would make strange noises. I forced myself to lie still, and eventually the sound stopped. I fell back asleep, trying to ignore the lingering feeling that something wasn't quite right. Over the next few days, strange things kept happening. Little things, like cold drafts in certain rooms, no matter how many windows I closed. I'd lock the back door at night, but in the morning it would be slightly open, as if someone had unlocked it. And there were the voices, faint, whispering voices that I could only hear when everything was silent, like someone was talking just out of earshot. I convinced myself I was just on edge from moving, that the isolation was getting to me. But one night, as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard a voice, clear and unmistakable. "Leave," it whispered, as cold as ice, sending a chill down my spine. I sat up, heart pounding, but the room was empty. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something in the house was observing me with a quiet, growing anger. I told myself it was just the wind, just my imagination, but deep down I knew there was more to it than that. I decided to do some digging, hoping to put my mind at ease. I went to the county records office and asked about the previous owner. The clerk gave me an odd look and lowered her voice. "Edgar Blakely. Lived there for over 50 years. People say he was into strange things, superstitions, rituals. He thought the land was cursed, that there were things watching him." She shrugged, glancing around as if she was worried someone might overhear. "They found him dead in the house by the fireplace. No signs of trauma, just gone. Like he'd seen something he couldn't handle." I drove back to the house feeling unsettled. When I got back, I decided to check out the fireplace. I hadn't really paid much attention to it before, but now, as I examined it closely, I noticed symbols etched into the stone. Strange, looping symbols I didn't recognize, almost hidden beneath years of soot. It looked as if Edgar had carved them there himself, as if he'd been trying to keep something out, or maybe keep it in. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house creak and groan. Around midnight, the whispering started again, louder this time, closer. I sat up, my heart pounding, and that's when I heard it, scratching. It was coming from the walls, a slow, deliberate scratching, like something trying to claw its way out. I held my breath, frozen in place, and then I heard the voice again, louder and angrier this time. "You don't belong here." The scratching grew louder, filling the room, and I felt a chill settle over me, colder than anything I'd ever felt. I jumped out of bed and grabbed my flashlight, shining it around the room, but there was nothing there. Just the empty darkness and that awful, suffocating cold. The next day, I decided I'd had enough. I started packing, throwing my things into boxes as quickly as I could. Whatever was haunting this house, I wanted no part of it. But as I was loading up my car, I heard a sound behind me, a low, angry growl, so close I could feel the breath on the back of my neck. I spun around, but there was no one there. Just the empty house, watching me, as if daring me to leave. I slammed the car door shut, started the engine, and sped down Desolation Ranch Road, not daring to look back. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Edgar standing on the porch watching me leave. But it wasn't Edgar I saw. It was a figure, tall and dark, with glowing eyes that followed me all the way down the road. When I finally made it back to the city, I sold the house as quickly as I could. I didn't care about the money, I just wanted to be rid of it. I never went back, and I don't plan to. Some places aren't meant to be lived in, and the house on Desolation Ranch Road was one of them. Whatever was there, it didn't want company, and I was happy to let it keep its silence. My name is Jack, and I'm not someone who scares easily. I've lived in Texas my whole life, so I've been around my share of strange sights and sounds out in the wide, empty land. But one night, not too long ago, something happened that I still don't understand. Even now, when I think back to it, my hands shake, and I feel a chill down my spine. It all started when my friend Dan dared me to spend the night in an old abandoned house on the outskirts of town. People called it the Blackwell House. It had been empty for years, and nobody wanted to go near it. They said it was haunted by the spirits of the Blackwell family who died there many years ago. People whispered that if you stayed the night, you could hear them, even see them. At first, I laughed it off. "Come on, Dan," I said. "You really believe in ghosts?" Dan looked serious. "Jack, I don't know what's out there, but I'm telling you something isn't right about that place." I wasn't sure if he was just trying to scare me, but I agreed to the dare. It was just one night, and I'd been through enough strange Texas nights to handle an empty house. Or so I thought. The night came, and I grabbed a flashlight, some snacks, and a sleeping bag. Dan wished me luck, then drove me out to the house in his old truck. As we got closer, I could see the house looming on the horizon, dark and silent against the setting sun. It was an old two-story building with broken windows and wooden walls that were cracked and peeling. The place seemed to suck the light right out of the sky, like it didn't belong in this world. "Last chance to back out," Dan said, giving me one last look. "Too late now," I replied, trying to sound braver than I felt. I stepped out of the truck, and the gravel crunched under my boots. Dan waved as he drove off, leaving me alone in front of the Blackwell house. I stood there for a moment, just staring up at it. A cold wind blew through the dry Texas air, and I could swear I heard a faint whisper. I told myself it was just the wind, just the house settling, nothing to worry about. The front door was unlocked, so I pushed it open, and it creaked as it swung back. Inside, the house was dark and smelled like dust and mold. My flashlight beam cut through the shadows, showing broken furniture, torn wallpaper, and cobwebs everywhere. The silence was so thick, I could almost feel it pressing down on me. I set up my sleeping bag in the living room, near a dusty old fireplace. There was an eerie feeling in the air, like someone was watching me. I tried to ignore it and sat down to eat some snacks, telling myself it was just an old, empty house. Hours passed, and the night got colder. The wind howled outside, and strange noises echoed through the house. Footsteps, whispers, soft scratching sounds. I told myself it was just the old wood creaking, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Then, around midnight, I heard something that froze me in place. It was a soft, sad voice, like a child crying. It sounded close, just down the hall from where I was sitting. My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced myself to stand up and walk toward the sound. "Hello?" I called out, but no one answered. I followed the sound down a narrow hallway until I reached a door that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. The crying was coming from behind it. My hand shook as I reached for the doorknob and slowly pushed the door open. Inside, I saw an empty room with a single small bed in the corner. The crying stopped as soon as I stepped inside. That's when I saw her, a little girl standing by the window looking out into the dark. Her hair was long and tangled, and she wore a white dress that looked like it was from another time. She didn't turn to look at me, but I could feel her sadness. Are you okay?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The girl didn't answer. She just kept staring out the window. Then, suddenly, she vanished, like a wisp of smoke, leaving only an icy chill behind. I stumbled back, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. My mind was racing. I didn't believe in ghosts, I never had, but I knew what I saw, and I couldn't deny it. For the rest of the night, I heard voices, footsteps, and strange whispers echoing through the halls. Shadows moved in the corners of my vision, but every time I looked, there was nothing there. By the time morning came, I was exhausted and desperate to leave. When Dan came to pick me up, I didn't say a word about what happened, but he looked at me and knew something was wrong. "You saw something, didn't you?" he asked quietly. I just nodded. I didn't have the words to explain what I'd experienced, but I knew one thing for sure: I would never go near the Blackwell house again.